Hello and welcome to the Leading Lounge. I'm your host, Dr. Justin Dubose. Here in the Leading Lounge, we talk with today's leaders and unpack lessons learned and being learned from a career of leading and communicating in their field. These conversations are designed to be both informal and informative, and we want to equip you with wisdom and tools to empower you as a leader where you are and where you want to be. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 28 of the Leading Lounge. This is our second episode in our leadership tips, tricks, and tools series, where I just want to give you some practical, research-based tips and tools for your leadership, to empower your leadership. And today's episode I'm particularly excited about because the topic has got to be relevant to everyone who leads or aspires to lead in any field, no matter what. And it's becoming a leader people want to follow, right? It's easy to be a leader, even if in name only, if you're in a position where people have to follow you, if you sign their paychecks, or, if they report to you and there's some performance evaluation tied up in that reporting. Like, people follow people that they don't want to follow all the time. But when you become a leader that people want to follow, now you've entered into the realm of good, healthy leadership where you're going to build something good and sustainable that can grow far beyond, however far your arms can reach. So it's a great topic. And from this book, this is the book that I mentioned using the leadership challenge here. And I'll have a link to this if you're watching on YouTube, in the description. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or somewhere else, it'll be in the show notes. But there's just some wonderful stuff in here about this. And I want to start by giving you an analogy, because my suspicion is that this is one of those problems that people assume it has like this really complex, difficult answer. How do I become a leader people want to follow? Well, I just assume it's this great mixture of things, that this is what people want to follow. And actually, it's very simple answer. It's an incredibly simple answer, one that many people overlook. I'll give you an example of how this happens, I think, in real life, where there's something that we assume is like this complex solution to a problem, and actually it's very, very, very simple. So I was out on a firing range one time with my Army unit, and this one soldier just couldn't get it. They just couldn't get it. They kept trying to qualify with their weapon over and over again, couldn't do it. And they kept assuming that it was all these things, maybe it's the weapon, or maybe it's not adjusted correctly, or maybe there's something, on this particular lane that's off, or, it's every possible solution that was really complicated. Meanwhile, as they continue to try to qualify with their weapon, they just can't do it. So this great NCO, the squared away NCO, comes over there and he says, "Soldier, let me ask you a question. Are you aiming at the center of the target? Are you aiming where you need to aim?" And, the assumption was like, of course I'm aiming where I need to aim. But the more they got into it together, the more they realized, no, the problem isn't all these things. The problem is you're not even aiming your weapon in the right place to hit the target. And so once we diagnosed and figured out that problem, guess what? The soldier qualified. It was great. But it was this thing where we thought, okay, it's got to be, maybe a mixture of these 4 or 5 variables. No, it's incredibly simple. You're just not aiming at the right spot, right? You're just not aiming at the right spot. And becoming a leader that people want to follow, based in research, not based in Justin's opinion, is quite simple. At least as a starting point of starting to become a leader that people want to follow. So I'm going to give you one tip. That's all. This leadership tips, tricks, and tools is one tip on how to become a leader that people want to follow. So if you have this book, and if not, again, the link to find it, I'll put it in the show notes and in the description. So on page 20, start on page 28. This is in chapter 2. They talk about this huge survey that they did. That's the authors of the book. And they surveyed 100,000 people. Okay, and that's not a small sample size. That's an awful lot of people that they surveyed for this thing. And the survey very simply asked, there's my watch there trying to chime in. The survey very simply asked, what's the characteristic what's the most important characteristic of a leader that you are willing to follow, right? What's the most important characteristic of someone that you're willing to follow? And so they talk about, all these answers and all these things. And then on page 30, they list all these characteristics. And also important to note is that they they did this survey over a period of years, right? So it started in 1987, and the last one they did here is in 2017, right? So if I get my math right, that's a 30-year period. And the answer, the particular characteristic of a leader that people want to follow has not changed in those 30 years, from 1987 to 2017. That single characteristic has remained the same. Ready? So here's the simple solution to what we think is a complex problem. Are you aiming at the center of the target? Of all these characteristics, number one, you want to take a guess? You think it's credentials, experience, position, being a visionary leader, casting vision, even just being competent at what you're doing. None of those are number one. You know what's number one? Honesty. Honesty. When someone is honest, when a leader is honest, people say, that's someone I'm willing to follow. That's the simple solution. When you're honest, people say they're willing to follow you. And this particular survey, done over 30 years, was also done, by the way, in multiple countries. It was in the US, Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, Japan, Korea, Malaysia, Mexico, Scandinavia, Singapore, Turkey, the UAE, all over the world, over 30 years, 100,000 people consistently say the number one thing of becoming a leader that people want to follow is simply being honest. And it's not very close every year. That's far and away the number one trait. So here's one of the problems I think that we have as leaders, and I don't know if this is within us or if it's in the institutions or the places that shape us or the relationships that shape us or whatever, is that building honesty, just the simple but profound character trait of honesty, begins to build credibility for you as a leader, where your people know, I can trust this person. And when you become credible, which honesty is the most important part in becoming credible, now you can begin to become a leader that people go, I'll follow this person. I want to follow this person. I'm happy to follow this person. I know that I can trust what they say. But so many times we think that, credentials are credibility. That, well, if I just get the right credentials, if I just get this degree, or if I just have this course, or if I just have this certification, or whatever the thing is, like, that's going to build credibility, and then people will want to follow me, or they'll hire me, or they'll promote me, or whatever. But credentials are not credibility. Okay, experience is not credibility. So many times I think that we think that, well, I've got 20 years, I've got 10 years, I've got 5 years, I've got all this varied experience. So therefore, people should get in line to follow me or give me this promotion or whatever. Credentials are not credibility. Experience is not credibility. And position is not credibility either. It doesn't matter what you've done. Those things are going to help. They might help you get, in the door somewhere. But those things are not going to make you into a leader that people want to follow. You actually don't need any of those things to become a leader that people want to follow. Just be honest. Just be honest with them. That's the simple solution. I want to give you a formula I came across in my doctoral studies. I was writing my dissertation, which was a business degree within the field of leadership, focused on communication. And I came across an article by this fellow named Toby Holmes. He's a professor at the University of Wyoming, educational leadership professor. And I'll put a link, by the way, to this article in the show notes or in the description there. But he had this formula for how to build trust, and it stuck with me. And I love it. And I've got it printed out and where I can see it. But it's that he says behavioral integrity plus credibility equals trust, right? So if you're looking for, let's say, a formula to honesty, which of course there isn't one, but this is the closest thing I can find, is how do you build trust? How do you become a leader that people want to follow? You become trustworthy. Part of that is being honest. But he says, and I agree, that behavioral integrity, which is you walk the talk, the things that you say to people, they see you live them out. The things that you ask them to do, they see you do that over time. Behavioral integrity. Plus credibility, which he defines as that you mean what you say and what you say is right, right? So you say what's right, you're honest, you're forthright, you're truthful, and you mean it. It's not that you say what's right and you don't mean it, or you do mean it, but what you say is wrong. None of those work. Is that credibility is that you mean what you say, you really believe what you're telling your people, but also you're telling them what's right. You're being honest, you're being forthright with them. That those things lead to building trust. Those things, that honesty leads to becoming trustworthy, and then people are more than happy to follow you. Let me give you a positive and a negative example before we wrap up this episode. But in the next episode of this podcast is going to be an interview. I'm alternating these episodes with interview episodes. And I interview a guy who's a friend of mine from the Army Reserves. He's a chaplain colonel. He's out in Hawaii. And he tells a story. I asked him a question in this interview about communication. And he tells a story where he said, my biggest regret, or my biggest leadership failure in communication, was that I tried to triangulate around someone. I tried to be kind of passive aggressive and triangulate around another team member. And what happened was I didn't really like what they were saying and I didn't agree with their plan. But rather than just tell them that, I tried to kind of go around them and work around them to get other people to see, oh yeah, this is a terrible plan. And yeah, we shouldn't follow that. We should get on board with yours. And the end result was everybody saw through it and the relationships fell apart. And in that instance, this guy who is incredibly trustworthy learned from that mistake that I just need to be honest. Even if those conversations are uncomfortable and even if they're hard, it pays to be honest, because now these people don't trust me, and I need to find another place to go and try again. Let's take a mulligan and try again. As a positive example, I've had to have many hard conversations with people regarding their performance or some interaction they had, and the conversations themselves were quite uncomfortable because it requires honesty. It requires me saying, look, man, that wasn't the right way to do it. You went about it all wrong. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. And they were hard and they didn't always end well, where people were happy with it and everything else. But in the long run, every single time it paid off, where not only that person knew, even if I disagree with Justin, I know that I can trust Justin, but other people on the team knew the same thing, that Justin's trustworthy. And even though these conversations are hard, and even though sometimes we may get to uncomfortable places where I hear things I don't agree with or don't want to hear, I know that there's honesty there. I know that there's trustworthiness, and I know that he's not asking me to do anything that he is not doing or wouldn't be willing to do himself. And that's not to brag on myself, because I've had many failures along the way, but I did want to give you a positive example too of what that looks like. But in becoming a leader people want to follow, just be honest. Just be honest. Just be honest. Practice honesty and practice, saying what's right and really believing in what you're saying. And then put that into practice. Let them see, the behavioral integrity piece is that I am walking the talk. I'm not just talking the talk. I'm walking the talk, and they get to see that. I would just kind of as a follow-up, I love these conversations. I really love them. So you can hit up our website, communicatetoCare.com, and we have some coaching packages, some coaching options. I'm happy to help walk you through these things. They're all natural growth curves as a leader, but they're so very important. So hit me up, send me a message, shoot me an email. An easy one is you can like and subscribe to the Leading Lounge wherever you listen to podcasts or on YouTube. We twice a month we release episodes, and every other one is an episode like this, and then every other one in between that is an interview. But would love for you to give me some feedback on what you're hearing that's helpful and useful. But be honest. In becoming a leader that people want to follow, just be honest, and that's all. Start there, and you'll begin to build credibility in your leadership. But God bless you. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time for the episode with Chaplain Colonel John Goldsworth.